WFAA in Dallas. Clearly, something has gone terribly wrong with the space shuttle. We are now seeing bits of debris falling from the sky.
Bring you up to date here. We were in the middle of our normal show, Fox and Friends, and anytime there's a shuttle landing, we try to show you that live. And so we cut to that about a minute before the shuttle was supposed to land at 9:16 Eastern Time. And it didn't come in. We didn't see it. We didn't see it. Didn't see it. And then finally, NASA alerted us that they could not find the shuttle, and they'd lost contact with it somewhere over Texas.
We are joined once again by Dexter Ingram, one of our guests. He's a former Navy pilot. Dexter, I guess and can imagine you can see this video here of the space shuttle coming in?
I can, and it doesn't look good at all. Two of the most critical phases of any kind of shuttle mission are the launch as well as the landing. And when you're coming in at an altitude that high, obviously, at a speed in excess of 12,000 miles an hour, any kind of glide scope deviation could cause great last-minute necessary changes. And again, when it's gliding in, it doesn't have the capability to maneuver as a typical plane would.
What do those trails suggest to you, Dexter, as you see them there on the video?
Well, it looks like different pieces of the shuttle.
Yeah, it looks like the shuttle has come apart over Texas.
Yeah. And just to bring people up to speed, we just want to give you the latest update. NASA is declaring a contingency. That means that they are in an emergency situation. They have lost contact with the space shuttle, and they have now told us that search and rescue teams in the Dallas area have been alerted. There you see a picture of the 7 astronauts who were scheduled to land in Florida just about half an hour ago. These are the astronauts with whom NASA has now lost contact, and something clearly horrible has gone wrong with this landing.
One of those being Ilan Ramon. He's a colonel in Israel's Air Force and a former fighter pilot. That is one reason why there was so much security around this particular shuttle mission, because he is the first Israeli pilot to be involved with a shuttle mission.
And NASA was so concerned about the liftoff, which went off without a hitch, and especially about this landing because of possible terrorist attacks. We're not saying that's what this is, but that's why NASA put up such an incredible amount of security in Southern California and in southern Florida.
Mr. Ingram, one question. We had heard from, I think, General McInerney that one thing that can cause a problem during this landing, once they get to, about 200,000 feet above the Earth, is vibration. Can you expound on that at all? Does that mean turbulence?
That's true. There are a lot of different factors in the atmosphere that cause planes or aircraft to buffet in a variety of different ways, and it's one of many possibilities. It could actually alter the glide slope to the point where the angle that it's coming in causes it to heat up to a point the aircraft isn't allowed or isn't used to being heated to.
I said without a hitch. I do now remember back, what it was 16 days ago when this thing took off. There was a little bit of a glitch on launch day. There was a piece of insulation foam on the external fuel tank. It came off, and it was believed to have struck the left wing of the shuttle. But then one of the lead flight directors at Mission Control assured all the reporters down there that this would not be a problem and the mission was going to go on, and it did for 16 full days, 80 experiments with these 2 female astronauts and 5 male astronauts.
And then once again, the Israeli pilot, the former fighter pilot from Israel on this mission, which caused so much concern and heightened security around it. Our David Lee Miller is live in Israel, in Jerusalem. He has more information on Ilan Ramon. David?
Just stand clear.
David's not quite ready, so we're going to get to him in just a little bit in Jerusalem. Again, this happened, it was scheduled to land, the shuttle Columbia, scheduled to land at 9:16. It is now 9:47, and we see this horrible footage coming out of our sister station, WFAA, in Dallas, Texas, of footage, we think, the shuttle Columbia breaking up over north central Texas.
And again, we're on the phone with Dexter Ingram. He was supposed to be talking to us about the military and a threat assessment, but apparently, Dexter, you used to be a pilot with the Navy, so you can shed some light on what is going on here and what we're seeing. We had heard from NASA that they have alerted rescue teams, search and rescue teams in Texas to be on guard, and they're telling everybody to be on the lookout for any debris. They're saying if there's any debris, not to touch it. It could be hazardous. Do you have any sense of what that debris might look like in Texas right now?
Well, there's a lot of hot debris, obviously, and one of the big concerns is going to be actually piecing together many pieces of the puzzle, finding parts of the craft itself and trying to figure out what happened. There are a variety of different experiments that were going on the plane. I'm not familiar with the experiments, but that could actually play a part into it. There's no hazard of radiation when it comes from that high in the atmosphere, but you're going to have hot pieces of aircraft, and if anybody comes into contact, of course the authorities are going to want to find out where these pieces are so they can put all the pieces together and hopefully find out what happened.
You know, they said it was at 200,000 miles up.
Feet?
207,000 feet.
Yeah, we were getting all sorts of different reports. Traveling at 12,000 miles an hour?
Yeah.
That's correct.
Okay, we're getting all sorts of different information coming across the wires here, so we've got to disseminate this properly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Once again, for those of you who are just joining us now, at much anticipated landing of the Space Shuttle Columbia, NASA lost contact with the craft around 8:16 Central Time. From what we understand right now, it was about 207,000 feet above the Earth, traveling at about 12,500 miles per hour. It was over north central Texas. NASA has declared an emergency and contingency plans, and they're urging anybody in that area to be careful if any debris comes on the ground. If they see anything there, it possibly could be radioactive. They're warning people to stay clear of that area. This is the longest time that communication has been lost with a shuttle flight. And of course, at this time, we're still hoping for the best. Looking at the video here that you see, there are several trails coming from this aircraft. And of course, one of our experts here, Dexter Ingram, who is a former Navy pilot, says, of course, this does not look good.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if it broke up at 200,000 feet above the
This is Mission
above
Control.
Texas. Here, let's listen to what the update is.
The space shuttle has been declared in mission control. Flight controllers here are securing all information, data, and notes pertinent to the descent of the Space Shuttle Columbia this morning from orbit. The last communications were received from the Space Shuttle Columbia at approximately 8 a.m. Central Time, as it was an altitude of about 200,000 feet above north central Texas, en route to a planned landing at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted to the Space Shuttle contingency. Any debris that may be located in the Dallas-Fort Worth vicinity should be avoided and may be hazardous due to the toxic nature of propellants used on board the shuttle, and should be reported to local law enforcement authorities. To repeat, any debris that is located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area should be avoided, as it may be hazardous due to toxic substances used as propellant on board the space shuttle, and should be reported to local law enforcement authorities. This is Mission Control, Houston.
Any moment, we expect to be joined by Buzz Aldrin, astronaut, former astronaut, who will be able to perhaps tell us more about what's going on today. We just heard from NASA updating us. You know, they're not saying that they've lost the Space Shuttle Columbia. They are saying that they are in a contingency mode right now and that they consider this an emergency situation. But obviously, if you've been watching us for the past few minutes, you see the pictures and you see that it looks truly, truly horrifying there. Buzz Aldrin is with us now. Mr. Aldrin, thank you for joining us. What can you tell us from what you've been hearing for the past, 45 minutes now?
Well, I'm afraid I can't tell you very much other than that I got up at 6 o'clock to watch the orbiter reentry. And as soon as I turned in some of the cable networks that were covering the entry, there didn't seem to be much going on. There wasn't much communication.
Are you looking at your television now?
Yes, I am.
And you see the pieces of debris. It looks as if it's pieces of debris over north central Texas.
Yeah, that's very similar to the debris that emanated after the Challenger accident.
Challenger,
and of course, for those who were watching the entry, I wasn't fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to have a ticket paid to go out to the South Pacific to see the Mir enter, but
Oh, yeah.
those people kind of missed what was happening. But the view is very, very similar, as the main portion of the center of gravity of the shuttle proceeds in its entry path. When other pieces are separated from it for whatever reason, they're all going to follow the same path also. So they're going to be slightly separated, but they'll show traces of entry paths that are, of course, going all in the same direction, and everything is going to re-enter once the deorbit burn is made. Every piece of that, every particle that comprises the shuttle is going to enter the atmosphere, and whether it burns up or not, it'll hit the ground.
Mr. Aldrin, what can you tell us about the safety features of this aircraft? Is there anything, or would there be anything on board in case something like this were to happen, that these astronauts could be jettisoned to safety?
Well, I have a company called Starcraft Boosters, and we have been doing some studies recently for an ejection pod that could be incorporated into the present shuttle fleet. That's quite an expensive and major overhaul. Alternatives to that are ejection seats for the crew, and when the shuttle was first flown, the first flight of Columbia, John Young and Bob Crippen had ejection seats, and those were flown in several of the subsequent shuttle flights for the crew safety, to be able to separate the crew from the orbiter.
Buzz,
It would have been absolutely useless under these conditions. The only thing that could save the crew would be a separable pod that could maintain control, and it just so happens that the last few weeks I've been pursuing verbally suggestions that we should look at the alternative of designing a Shuttle 2, a second-generation Shuttle 2, that would have an ejection pod on it that could save the crew, and that could happen at any time during launch. The ejectable pod could save the crew at any time during launch and throughout the flight. We would design that pod so that it could also be adapted as the crew return or crew rescue vehicle on the space station. It's a plan that I have had in my own mind and discussing with other people as an alternative to be looked at. And I'm sure after the events of today begin to settle down and we understand exactly what happened, there will be an increased movement toward establishing a crew ejectable pod on the space shuttles. Whether they will ever do that for the present orbiters is debatable.
Yeah, our more immediate concern, of course,
now.
Our immediate concern now is what's happening today. We're talking with the second man to walk on the moon, Buzz Aldrin, who has awakened this morning, as you probably have, to see these horrible images on the screen. This from our sister station, one of our affiliates in Dallas, Fort Worth, WFAA, over north central Texas. We believe that this is debris of the space shuttle Columbia, the oldest in the shuttle fleet. Right. We believe that this is an image of it breaking up over Texas.
And in case you're just joining us, NASA has not said that it's lost the space shuttle yet, but they said that they are in an emergency situation, and it seems clear from these pictures that this will not end well. We want to thank Buzz Aldrin for joining us. And now we're joined by Captain Jim Lovell, who is on the line. Mr. Lovell, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Can you tell us what if you've been watching these pictures, what you think is going on at NASA right now?
Well, I think they're assessing the situation. They want to know all the information, look at all the tapes, and try to look at all the data to see exactly what occurred. Obviously, it's a disaster, and they want to make sure that whatever they tell to the media that it's correct as far as they know. It'll take some months before they do an analysis of the breakup and look at the history of the orbiter and look at the conditions of where the breakup started as far as any loads on the vehicle and things like that.
Captain Lovell, we were talking just a little while ago about Apollo 13, and talking about the movie, of course. Unfortunately, that's how most of the people in the United States know about the situation with your aircraft. And the concern there was that the spacecraft was going to burn up. And I remember back in the early days of NASA and the space program, that was the huge concern, that the capsule would burn up. Have we alleviated those problems?
Well, you're talking about two different vehicles here. The command module that we had, as long as the explosion didn't disrupt the heat shield behind us, we had a very small, compact capsule going through.
Yeah.
Of course, we hit the atmosphere at 25,000 miles an hour, and the shuttle comes in about 17.5. But it has a large, wider area. It's got wings. It's got tail section, and all those things that take an effect of just what happened. Now, if the breakup occurred something like 200,000 up, it might be that you have to look at the loads on the vehicle to see just what caused the breakup.
Captain Lovell, we're talking about a shuttle aircraft that's the oldest. Hold on, let's listen in once again to Mission Control.
Has been declared here in Mission Control as a result of the loss of communication with the Space Shuttle Columbia at approximately 8 a.m. Central Time this morning, as it was descending toward a landing at the Kennedy Space Center, scheduled to touch down there at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. Communications and tracking of the Space Shuttle was lost at 8 a.m. as it was approximately 200,000 feet above the north central Texas area. Search and rescue teams in the Dallas-Fort Worth area have been alerted. Any debris that is located in that vicinity that may be related to the Space Shuttle contingency should be avoided and may be hazardous as a result of toxic propellants that are used on board the Space Shuttle, and should be reported to local law enforcement authorities.
For those of you who are just joining us,
Controllers here are securing all information and notes and data pertinent to today's descent by the Space Shuttle Columbia. This is Mission Control, Houston.
that was Mission Control in Houston talking about a state of emergency that they have declared on the loss of communication with the Space Shuttle Columbia. That communication was lost around 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The shuttle was scheduled to land around 8:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are on the phone now with former Chief Astronaut and Captain Jim Lovell. Mr. Lovell, this is the oldest aircraft in the fleet here. It was built in 1979. It has a wingspan or a length of 122 feet. Buzz Aldrin was saying that there perhaps needs to be, or looking at additional safety measures for new aircraft. But I guess the question I have to ask you, with a aircraft at 200,000 feet in the air traveling 12,000 plus miles per hour, is there anything that could be done at that point to safeguard the lives of astronauts?
Well, you don't know what caused the accident. It could have been a structural failure. It could have been some sort of explosion of the fuels on board. That somebody would have got into the high atmosphere. The vibrations might have done something like that. So until you really analyze this particular catastrophe, you won't be able to go forward and say, hey, what can we do to fix it? I know from a fact that these shuttles are very closely inspected all the time. Anything that might go wrong, they correct. But, you know, a fuel line could have cracked, causing an explosion. There could have been something coming off the vehicle. But, you know, at 200,000 feet, I'm sure it's still under attitude rocket control rather than aerodynamic control.
Captain Lovell, we're getting reports of residents in North Texas heard a big bang.
And the windows shook in their house. They thought it was a sonic boom going overhead, they said.
Another guy described it like a tornado, very loud and intense, shook his whole house. It was loud enough and it was low enough, he thought, that it shook his building, but still it's so incredibly high in the air.
Yeah, it could have been an explosion rather than a structural failure. So, you know, that'll have to come in the analysis later on.
You know, Captain Lovell, you know better than anyone, really, what these astronauts on board were experiencing as they were coming in for a landing. What's it like on board 16 minutes before you're supposed to land? I can imagine that everybody must be, is it tense or is it exciting?
Well, I've never been on a shuttle or the orbiter, so I don't really know, but I would suspect there's a sort of a sigh of relief. They're coming back home. They're only 16 minutes from landing at the Cape, and you know, we've had well over 100 of these flights, and the vehicles have worked perfectly, and so you know, and in case if you look at the analysis, all of our shuttle accidents have occurred inside or near or in the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. So it's the atmospheric part of the flights that are probably the most critical for any kind of a failure.
Captain, of course, with the Israeli colonel on board this flight, there was a lot of concerns about security. I've got to ask you, do you think there would be any possibility that terrorism could be involved with this particular incident here?
You're asking the wrong person about that. I have no idea. I'm sure the security down at the Cape with the vehicle and the people was very, very close and very secure, and so I doubt that very seriously.
Captain Lovell, before you go, we're going to bring Buzz Aldrin back in here, and hopefully we'll hear from you again, Captain Lovell.
I'm about ready to get on an airplane that's 3 years younger than that shuttle was.
Oh, my goodness.
So I'm heading off right now.
Well, Captain, we appreciate the information from you.
Okay.
A man who certainly had been through it, of course. Remember Jim Lovell on Apollo 13
yes.
and all the troubles they had, and we were very afraid we were going to lose him and his co-pilots on Apollo 13. Most of you remember the movie, of course, with Tom Hanks, and Tom Hanks played Captain Jim Lovell in that film.
Very harrowing flight coming back in.
Yeah, let's bring back in Buzz Aldrin, if he's with us. Mr. Aldrin, are you back with us?
So.
Oh, not yet. Oh, Mr. Aldrin, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, we were just talking to Jim Lovell about what has happened here today. It certainly looks like there's been a catastrophic end to the Space Shuttle Columbia's flight. What Jim Lovell was just saying was that the most dangerous part, I guess, I mean, other than takeoff, is when he was saying the atmospheric parts of the flight, meaning coming back into the Earth's atmosphere. Why is that so dangerous?
Well, all the energy that goes into accelerating the shuttle to orbital speed, all that rocket thrust is stored energy in terms of kinetic energy that the shuttle has when it has to dissipate that energy through heat and slowing down during the reentry to get back to a state of rest back here on Earth. So the same amount of energy has to be removed from the shuttle in the form of light and heat and energy changing the motion of it.
It's where all the friction takes place, takeoff and landing.
Interesting to note, too, the Columbia was the first space shuttle to go into space. Once again, it's the oldest in the fleet. It was assembled in 1979. And here we are now in the year 2003, this aircraft returning to Earth. And communication was lost with all astronauts on board around 8 o'clock Central Standard Time.
Our Brett Baer, one of our reporters, of course, at the Pentagon, says the Pentagon officials are holding meetings on this shuttle situation, which now looks like a shuttle disaster. Secretary Rumsfeld has been briefed and is in his office at this moment.
And yet, Mr. Aldrin, I mean, it's so interesting to hear all of the sort of stress that happens when they're coming in for a landing, and yet NASA has never lost a space crew during landing. And, you know, we were talking here earlier about how they almost make it seem easy. You know, it sort of comes gliding down and miraculously it hits the target. But this is the most dangerous, would you say, part of the entire journey?
Well, no, I would say the most dangerous is the launch phase and probably the first few seconds of launch until the launch vehicle has cleared the tower. That's the most dangerous part. And then probably the next most dangerous is a maximum dynamic pressure, maximum pressure of the atmosphere as the shuttle accelerates in launch. Then once it gets above significant parts of the atmosphere, there's no longer that high pressure. But during reentry, as soon as the atmosphere is encountered as the spacecraft descends in its orbit, it begins to touch the atmosphere, and now we're also approaching very dangerous conditions because it has to be properly aligned in order to make the correct entry.
Buzz Aldrin, thank you very much. We will let you go. We really appreciate the information this morning. Buzz Aldrin, of course, the second man down the ladder.
Nice to talk to you folks.
Right behind Neil Armstrong, second man to walk on the moon. Buzz Aldrin with information for us this morning on this horrible morning when we think we've lost one of our space shuttles.
The president has been alerted to this, as you can imagine, and he is heading back to the White House at this time from Camp David. I don't know if we have Senator Bill Nelson from Florida. We don't have him with us. He will be joining us shortly. He was on the 24th mission on the Space Shuttle Columbia, so perhaps he can share some personal insights about that aircraft with us when we get him.
In Mission Control.
Listen to Mission Control now.
Due to the loss of communication from the Space Shuttle Columbia that occurred at approximately 8 a.m. Central Time this morning as Columbia was descending toward a landing planned at the Kennedy Space Center to occur at 8:16 a.m. Central Time. At the time that communication was lost, Columbia was above the north central Texas area at an altitude of approximately 200,000 feet. No communications or tracking data was received from Columbia since that time. Search and rescue forces have been alerted in the north central Texas vicinity and eastern Texas. Any persons in those areas reporting debris should avoid any debris that may be associated with the space shuttle's contingency, as it may be hazardous and toxic due to the toxic nature of propellants that are used on board the shuttle. Any such debris that is located should also be reported as quickly as possible to local law enforcement agencies. Again, a space shuttle contingency has been declared in Mission Control. Flight controllers here are securing all information and data pertinent to today's descent by the Space Shuttle Columbia. The last communications from which were received at approximately 8 a.m. Central Time. This is Mission Control, Houston.
We are reading the wires right now about what people in Texas are reporting hearing as the shuttle was traveling overhead. They say that they heard a big bang at about 9 a.m. their time. They say that that's the same time that all radio and data communication with the shuttle was lost, according to NASA.
You know, we are working on trying to hook up with our affiliate in Dallas to get some more eyewitness reports, but we're getting plenty of information across the wire, so we'll bring to you the minute we get it.
We heard other people say that the windows in their house shook violently, and they said that it sounded like a sonic boom.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, the communication was lost with Space Shuttle Columbia, the oldest in the fleet, assembled in 1979 at around 8 o'clock Central Standard Time. It was approximately 16 minutes from landing at the Space Center, Kennedy Space Center in Florida. It was at about 207,000 feet, going at approximately 12,500 miles per hour. Communication has been lost. We understand that the entry phase occurs with these craft at around 400,000 feet, and that is about 4,400 miles from the landing site. Once again, communications was lost at around 207,000 feet.
Well, somebody who knows exactly what's going on here is Senator Bill Nelson. He's been aboard one of our shuttles, the 24th mission, senator from the state of Florida, where the shuttle was supposed to be landing at 9:16, Senator, this morning. This is a horrible morning for not only NASA, but for the United States.
It's a tragic day. It's a very sad day for America and for the world because our technological prowess is symbolized in the space shuttle. Mm-hmm. But space flight is a risky business. And, you know, the American public has come to think like that it's getting in a car and driving on a Sunday afternoon, and it's anything but that.
You know, Senator,
it is a risky proposition.
You're absolutely right. In fact, when we watch these landings, we always marvel how beautiful they are and how easy it seems. And, you know, at times we even kind of joke about it. Oh, this is a beautiful landing. But you're absolutely right. This is such a volatile situation on takeoff and landing. How long ago were you on the shuttle?
17 years ago this month, it was the 24th flight of the space shuttle. It was the orbiter Columbia. We landed, and the tragedy, we landed on January the 18th, and just 10 days later, the tragedy of the loss of Challenger occurred when Challenger blew up 10 miles high in the Florida sky. That was 17 years ago in 1986, January.
Senator, you said the Columbia, so the same space shuttle, you were on it.
Yes.
That we're talking about here.
As a matter of fact, and this is almost 17 years to the day that Challenger blew up. Challenger blew up on January the 28th, 1986.
Oh, my gosh. And that was early in the morning, wasn't it?
Senator Nelson, I'm curious, on these shuttles, is there such a thing as a black box of a voice recorder or a flight data recorder?
No, you're not going to be able to recover any of that because it would be coming down through the atmosphere. The angle of attack has to be at exactly the right angle. Otherwise, as the molecules of air hitting the underside of the space shuttle start to heat up the shuttle, if it's not at the right angle of attack, the shuttle will burn up. And I don't know the details yet. I'm leaving Tampa, racing to the Cape right now, so I don't have a lot of details, but if this was over Texas, it would have been well into the reentry, and it would be at that fiery stage of reentry, so the likelihood of anything surviving the burning up, except just bits and pieces, would be very slim.
Senator, can you describe that aircraft to us, the interior of it? We know that you were on it on that 24th mission. Describe your experiences on that aircraft.
Well, as the two most dangerous parts are the ascent and the reentry. You do a deorbit burn basically halfway around the world, about an hour. For a half hour, you fall. Basically, gravity is bringing you slowly back, and about a half hour out from landing, you're starting to hit the upper atmosphere, and that's when the molecules of air striking the shuttle start to heat it up so that the underside of the shuttle is 3,000 degrees. The computers have to be working to give the right angle of attack, because if your nose gets too low, you'll burn up. If your tail gets too low, you'll burn up. This is a very risky part of the mission. We've never had a failure of those computers, and you know, if our astronauts had to take over manual control because of a computer failure, that would be a very dicey operation for them to be able to get that angle of attack. When you get down to about 50,000 feet near the runway, the commander takes over manual control, and he flies it in, although he does not have an engine.
Yeah.
A dead stick landing, but of course the crews are so good they can put it on a dime. That's the essence. When we re-entered, we could see on the night side of the Earth, it looked like daylight, which was the glow from the 3,000 degrees of heat underneath the space shuttle.
Oh, my gosh. Senator,
we're flying overhead.
we got to let you go here, but we're in the 20 seconds left here. How long would it take to go from north central Texas at 12,000 miles an hour to the landing in Florida? Just minutes.
That'd be probably 10, 12 minutes.
10, 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Senator, thank you very much. Drive safely to Tampa.
Okay, bless you.
Bless you, too.
You too.
America.
And we'd like everyone to stay tuned as our coverage of the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster continues.
A grave and devastating moment. It appears now that the Space Shuttle Columbia has been lost, along with all 7 crew members, 7 astronauts on board during the landing process and it happened about 1 hour and 19 minutes ago. NASA declared an emergency and feared the worst after losing communications with the Space Shuttle Columbia as the ship and its 7 astronauts, including one Israeli, soared over Texas several minutes before its expected landing. As the minutes wore on, there appeared to be no hope for survival. And there you see some of the pictures caught on video cameras. And it appears to be clearly a breakup of the Space Shuttle Columbia, which would have been traveling roughly 207 feet over north central Texas at a terrific rate of speed, unsurvivable if the craft would break up. It was traveling at 12,500 miles per hour when Mission Control suddenly lost contact and tracking data. And there are the devastating pictures. And this, of course, is a horrible tragedy, not just for NASA and the American space program, for the United States at large, and, of course, Israel, which had on board the Columbia, an Israeli astronaut. I'm Greg Jarrett, along with Kiran Chetri.
The first Israeli astronaut to ever go up into space in the U.S. space program, and that person, along with 6 other crew, scheduled to come back. Everything looked like it was going well. We heard word from NASA just a few minutes before they were scheduled to bring in the shuttle that there was a problem. They had lost contact. They were going into emergency mode. They were doing some of their backup measures, but at the same time, we were also hearing that they were sending rescue crews out to that area. They have told us and the general public to avoid any debris that may be found on the ground that anyone in the Texas area may come into contact with on the ground, saying to stay away from that debris as it could be very dangerous. Yet there's no official word that the shuttle Columbia has actually been lost. But when we talk to some of the experts and we look at these pictures, and you see clearly that there is one object coming down, but trails of other objects as well coming down with what was supposed to be the shuttle.
Residents of North Texas heard what is being described by so many of them as a big bang, and it was about 9:01, 9:02 this morning. It's roughly an hour and 20 minutes ago, about the very same time that the Space Shuttle Columbia disappeared on its way to a landing at Cape Canaveral. Bet Baer, our Pentagon correspondent, is standing by on the telephone. Brett, you've been able to talk to some of your sources at the Pentagon. What are they saying?
Hi, Greg. Yeah, Pentagon officials are telling us that Defense Secretary Rumsfeld was briefed this morning. As we've reported also, obviously the President has been briefed at Camp David. But Pentagon officials are telling us that the military is meeting on this and, in fact, is mobilizing a number of different units to help in search and recovery. They're also helping in tracking the situation. Obviously, NASA is the lead agency here and is doing the main work here in tracking what is coming down. Also, we can tell you that the military, however, is meeting about this and has activated some units in search and recovery. That's really all we have. We can tell you that the highest levels of government, things are moving, but obviously this is developing as we speak.
But Brett, from the tone and tenor of your conversations with these Pentagon officials, they are pretty much conceding that the shuttle and its astronauts have been lost?
For the most part, they are. They are not sure, but that is the tone, and that is basically what they're conceding.
All right.
We're also getting word that President Bush, who was scheduled to spend a little bit of time at the presidential retreat for the weekend in Camp David in Maryland, is actually returning. He has been briefed on the situation and is monitoring the situation, according to a White House spokesperson. Still no official word from NASA that the Space Shuttle Columbia indeed did break apart, but from these pictures you can see it simply looks devastating. When a shuttle is coming in, you see one trail of smoke coming as it enters the atmosphere at that huge rate of speed, about 12,000 miles per hour. Here, though, you can see other trails, indicating from a lot of the experts we've talked to that it looks like pieces of the shuttle.
There is an ability for astronauts to eject from a space shuttle, but it is, according to our experts that we've been talking to, a very difficult, nearly impossible process at this altitude. Again, 207 feet over north central Texas, and traveling at an incredible rate of speed of 12,500 miles per hour. Almost impossible, first of all, to survive at that altitude. You wouldn't be able to breathe air without some assistance. And moreover, at 12,500 miles per hour, the human body, unprotected, might not be able to survive that incredible rate of speed and friction. And indeed, as you see from these pictures, dramatic videotape pictures, which we've slowed down for you, the shuttle itself could not apparently survive. If this is what we believe it to be, the shuttle breaking up in flight at roughly 200,000 plus feet over Texas, it would be nearly impossible for the 7 astronauts to survive. Their wives, children, husbands of the astronauts who had been waiting at the landing strip gathered together by NASA, and they have, we understand now, been taken to a secluded place.
We have with us on the phone John Getter. He's a former NASA reporter. Can you hear us?
Yes, I hear you fine. Good morning.
Thanks for being here, and good morning. First time in 42 years, in the 42-year history of the space program, that there's been any type of problem like this in terms of trying to bring a shuttle back in. What do you make of this, what you're seeing on the screen?
This is obviously the second most dangerous part of a shuttle mission, takeoff being the highest danger. And during this period, as you've been talking about, the shuttle is traveling at roughly Mach 25. 25 times the speed of sound, slowing down to 200 miles an hour when it touches down on the runway. During that period, it heats up tremendously, and it sure appears from the video that it came apart in pieces real suddenly.
And when we're hearing from experts and we're talking about just how difficult it is to carry off a landing, the slightest angle up or down could cause a shuttle to burn. When we try to find answers as to how this could have happened, if indeed this turns out to be the worst case scenario that we're all fearing, it seems so amazing that it doesn't happen more because of just how difficult it is to carry this off.
Let me comment on the last thing first, and that is, I think it's sadly, we have to conclude that it is a worst case scenario. These pictures, other than the angle that the pieces are flying in, are eerily reminiscent of the pictures of Challenger when it fell apart, literally came apart on its way to orbit. It was going slower, but it was the same problem that you touched on there, Kieran. That is, if the shuttle gets just a little out of alignment, if things aren't absolutely perfect, the aerodynamic forces, because it's going so fast, can literally tear it apart. If, as some are speculating, in this case, the critical insulation was damaged by falling ice or some such thing as that during the liftoff, there's some talk about that, then there may have been a place there that had inadequate insulation where something could have happened and it could have burned through. It also could be a case where there's a small piece loose and the insulation peels off the tiles and the blankets, almost like a zipper being undone. It's difficult to know at this stage, but what's most difficult is to look at those pictures and realize what's happening.
This is Greg Jarrett. Let me squeeze in a quick question, if I can, off of what you just said. It had been reported earlier, and NASA knew that during liftoff, some of this insulation had come apart and struck one of the wings. Would they, while in space, have been able to get an astronaut out there and personally inspect it to see whether this might pose a problem upon re-entry?
Could they have done so? Yes, but odds are they wouldn't have to satisfy their own concerns.
Why is that?
We had a problem like this back on the first shuttle launch, STS-1, where a tile or two fell off under the wing, and there was discussion of sending the crew out to look at it. They decided not to and never said why, primarily because they were able to point at it with spy satellites and real high-quality telescopes from the ground and ascertain the amount of damage. Mm-hmm. And, of course, STS-1, the first shuttle flight, ended successfully. I presume that in this case they probably did the same thing and were satisfied that there was not a risk, or they would have taken those kind of precautions. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that I'm sure they looked at it, and I'm sure they decided that it was okay, and clearly something was not okay.
There had been talk as well of another problem that appeared minor at the time. They talked about a malfunctioning dehumidifier within the shuttle, keeping the temperature up a little higher than they like it to be in there. In your opinion, would that be a factor as we try to figure out what could have possibly gone wrong? Would that have anything to do with something like this?
Well, never say never, but I can't imagine how it would, because that dehumidifier problem had to do with a module that was being carried, the laboratory module that was being carried in the back of the Columbia for the crew to do their scientific experiments, for the Israeli astronaut to do what he did for his country, and so on. And that, I think, was an entirely separate issue, so I'd be very surprised if there was any linkage at all. There are always operational problems, if you will, that come up on a shuttle flight or on the International Space Station. It's the nature of the beast. They're complicated machines doing very complicated work. In this